It's Friday, the 17th of September, 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. Prime Minister Scott Morrison hails a new era of cooperation with the US and UK as China applies to join a regional trade partnership with Australia. That's our main story. Also coming up in today's podcast, the unemployment rate falls despite more than 146,000 people losing their jobs last month. Telstra outlines a plan to cut costs and grow its 5G network. And the boss of ANZ warns that the housing market is triggering a social divide. Then stay listening for our chat to Commonwealth Bank's Gareth Aird about the labour market. First, here's a brief look at markets. Wall Street was lower overnight despite figures showing that retail sales in the US rose more than expected. In early afternoon trading, the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average were both down 0.2%, while the Nasdaq 100 was off 0.1%. European markets were higher, with the Stoxx Europe 600 up 0.5% and London's FTSE 0.2% stronger. The S&P ASX 200 finished up 0.6% yesterday to close at 7,460 points. It was a broad-based rally with all sectors of the ASX 200 rising, with the exception of consumer discretionary stocks. Among the large caps, the big banks were all stronger, led by Commonwealth Bank, which jumped 1.4%. Other companies to rise 1% or more included CSL, Transurban, James Hardie and Xero. Woodside Petroleum jumped 2.5% on the back of stronger oil prices. Fortescue Metals was the worst of the large caps, off more than 3%, while Rio Tinto was down nearly 1%. Oil prices were up a touch overnight, but the price of gold fell more than 2%. That doesn't augur well for gold stocks on the ASX today. And the Aussie dollar is trading at a touch under 73 US cents. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said a new deal to acquire nuclear-powered submarines from the United States and United Kingdom is the start of a forever partnership, warning that defence spending needs to accelerate given the strategic threats posed by China. The decision to end the current $90 billion multi-year contract with French group Naval at a cost to taxpayers of $400 million and sign a new arrangement is the centrepiece of a defence research and technology agreement between the US, the UK and Australia. Australia will acquire at least 8 nuclear submarines as well as Tomahawk cruise missiles for air warfare destroyers. Not surprisingly, the French government blasted the backflip, while opposition leader Anthony Albanese gave his support. Mr Morrison also said he's open to talking to Chinese leader Xi Jinping about the new arrangements. I just don't think Mr Xi will take the phone call, particularly after his spokesperson from Beijing called the deal extremely irresponsible and destabilising to the Pacific region. Not everyone is happy about the Prime Minister's efforts to cosy up to Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. The Association of Mining and Exploration Companies said the new defence pact could harm the mining sector. Chief Executive Warren Pearce said while Australia was building defence and security partnerships, it wasn't rebuilding its relationship with its major trading partner. Fair call. The story has yet another twist in it. Beijing overnight applied to be part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, a deal signed by the US, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and 7 other countries to open up trade flows. The US pulled out of the deal under President Donald Trump, and now Beijing wants in. Members of the partnership, including Australia, have veto rights of new members, but it would open the way for Australia to improve its economic relationship with China. Dealing with Beijing is a constant, evolving challenge. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has pushed Australia further towards traditional allies. Our economy has withstood the pressure from China over recent years on tariffs and bans on exports, but Beijing understands the need for and benefits of global trade. And including China in a trade deal would have far-reaching benefits for all the economies in the partnership. A middle ground with China, without the current rhetoric, could benefit both Canberra and Beijing. In a moment, the rest of the news you need to know this morning. In overseas news, China announced yesterday it had fully vaccinated 1 billion people against COVID-19, or 70% of its population. That's about 2.16 billion jabs. There are 7 Chinese-developed vaccines as part of the rollout. The United Arab Emirates is introducing sniffer dogs at its airports to detect COVID. After a year-long study, canines are 98% successful in detecting the coronavirus, the UAE claims. German Shepherds, Labradors, Cocker Spaniels and Border Collies can recognise the scent of COVID-19 from sweat samples. And shares in Macau casinos have tumbled this week after Beijing said it would crack down on the industry and potentially appoint representatives to supervise the gaming operators, as well as boost local shareholders in the companies. It follows similar crackdowns in the technology and education sectors. Investors aren't happy with Beijing at the moment. Locally, amid the severe lockdowns in New South Wales, the ACT and Victoria, the national unemployment rate fell to 4.5% as tens of thousands of people stopped looking for work and dropped out of the official data. The number of people employed declined by more than 146,000 last month, according to the Bureau of Statistics, with big falls in both full-time and part-time work. The total number of hours worked fell nearly 4% and underemployment rose, but the participation rate fell to 65.2%. The bottom line unemployment rate, 4.5% is the lowest rate in more than a decade, is a statistical aberration. If the participation rate had stayed the same as it was a couple of months ago, the unemployment rate would be closer to 7%. New South Wales suffered the biggest number of job losses and the largest reduction in participation, while Victoria recorded a rise in jobs, in part because the reference week for the survey was just after that state's full lockdown began. It's likely that just as many people again will have lost their jobs across the country by the time the September number is printed. The good news in the jobs market is that employment listings and intentions remain better than during last year's lockdowns. So, after a busy week in economics, we now know that things are slowing but not slumping. While many discouraged workers have left the employment market, the outlook for jobs isn't a disaster. And just like most of the economic prognoses since March last year, the future depends on the spread of COVID-19 and, more specifically, vaccination rates. And interest rates aren't rising for some time yet. New South Wales recorded 1,351 new local COVID cases yesterday and 12 deaths. The good news is that almost half the state is fully vaccinated and the number of cases seems to have stabilised. There were 514 new cases in Victoria, with the state hitting a 70% one jab rate. State Premier Daniel Andrews announced some very limited easing of restrictions, with gathering outdoors in groups of 2 allowed. The national rate of vaccination is almost 70% for the first dose and just shy of 45% for 2 doses. Wesfarmers has won the support of the board of Australian Pharmaceutical Industries after upping its bid for the wholesale distributor and retailer of pharmaceutical products by 12% to $764 million. The announcement triggered a 17% jump in API's share price and ends 2 months of discussions. API's major shareholder, Washington H. Soul Pattinson, owns 19% of the company and has agreed to the deal. It includes Priceline Pharmacies and Clear Skincare. They'll become the basis of a new healthcare arm for Wesfarmers. Wes's shares rose 0.6% yesterday. A growing number of employers are mandating either compulsory vaccinations or a no jab, no office policy. Yesterday, it was law firm Gilbert & Tobin who said staff would only be allowed back into the office if they'd been double jabbed. The day before, it was Downer Group who said staff at its Spotless Catering subsidiary must be fully vaccinated. The airlines and manufacturer SPC have also introduced no jab, no work policies. Yesterday, New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard said businesses in his state wouldn't be able to trade unless all staff are fully vaccinated when the state reopens in 4 weeks' time. But individuals, rather than employers, would cop any fines. Telstra boss Andy Penn fronted investors yesterday and said by 2025 the telco giant will strip out a further $500 million of costs, grow its Telstra Plus rewards program and expand investment in its 5G network so it covers 80% of mobile traffic. Mr. Penn has spearheaded a massive reorganisation of Telstra over the past few years, cutting tens of thousands of jobs and making the company more efficient as it battled much fiercer competition thanks to the rollout of the national broadband network. Its share price has struggled and is trading where it was 4 years ago. The next few years, Mr. Penn says, is about growth. Telstra's share price ended 0.5% lower yesterday. The chair of ANZ, Paul O'Sullivan, said the main conversation institutional investors want to have is about the bank's environmental, social and governance policies. It's putting pressure on the bank to toughen its climate change commitments. Meanwhile, ANZ boss Shane Elliott said low interest rates, record house prices and flat wages growth was creating a social divide, making it very difficult for younger Australians to get into the mortgage market. He said banks have a moral responsibility to develop strategies to reduce the chance of financial inequality between owners and renters. He said housing affordability is a problem and has become a social issue. And staying on the same theme, Victoria's competition regulator has fined Melbourne real estate agency K & Burton $10,000 for underquoting when showing a house. The property in the Melbourne suburb of Armadale sold for $5.8 million, nearly $2 million more than the price guide. Retailer Myer has released its best result in 5 years, and its boss, John King, thinks Christmas will come early as shoppers buy soon to make sure their gifts arrive in time for December. The department store is stocked up and hopes to reopen stores in Sydney in mid-October and in Melbourne 2 weeks later. Net profit rose to $46 million for the year to the end of July, compared to a $172 million loss a year earlier. Sales are up 6%. Myer's share price jumped 17% yesterday and has almost doubled over the past 6 months. Commonwealth Bank is facing 30 criminal charges for false and misleading conduct in the sale of consumer credit insurance policies between 2011 and 2015. During the Hayne Royal Commission into Banking, it emerged that as many as 64,000 customers had been sold insurance while ineligible to make claims. Since then, the bank has refunded customers a total of $75 million and now faces $51 million in penalties. Commonwealth Bank yesterday said it will plead guilty to the charges and is working with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. And finally, Whitehaven Coal has been given the go-ahead to restart its Vickery coal mine in New South Wales by the Federal Environment Minister, Susan Ley. The minister attached 37 conditions to her approval, none of which were particularly unusual for a coal mine. Whitehaven now has a right to extract 10 million tonnes each year of thermal coal and semi-soft coking coal from Vickery for the next 30 years. Its share price jumped 2.7% yesterday and is up 35% over the past month as coal prices soar. Up next is our daily interview, and today we're joined by Gareth Aird, the head of Australian economics at the Commonwealth Bank. Gareth explains the key messages in yesterday's labour force data and what will happen to jobs in the broader economy when New South Wales and Victoria eventually start to open up. He also looks at the amount of savings in every household and what will happen to house prices over the next year or so. Gareth always does a terrific job of describing what's ahead of us. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. It's Friday, the 17th of September, 2021. I'm Sean Aylmer, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.